Alrighty. Finally, it's time to cover combat in a certain fixer's urban nightmare. Before we get into the specifics, I'll outline the design philosophy here. A lot of the time when DMing sessions of other TTRPGs, combat tends to be something of a sore spot, where players are usually invested in the unraveling lore and characterization of other player characters, even when it isn't their turn to speak. Combat is an entirely different matter. Outside of exceedingly critical encounters, a lot of players would prefer to phase out or pay less attention to an ongoing turn in combat. This is more so the case online than in person, but it's definitely a design problem rather than strictly an engagement one. Now, one might argue that you can engage more in combat by simply making suggestions to the ongoing turn, or backseating essentially, but that is liable to piss off the current player unless they explicitly ask for help. This is a long ongoing issue with many turn-based tabletop RPGs and board games, but there's a few ways to fix it. Let's take the second half of the problem, the eventual backseating by players that want more of a part in combat. What if we treat that not as a problem, but instead as the solution to our engagement problem here? What if it was everyone's turn at the same time, and the goal was indeed to negotiate what the optimal outcome and scenario is before processing at all? Well, now we've gone from a raw comparison of stats one at a time to an intricate puzzle box of an encounter to solve together as a party. I find with this logic, the power gamers and the less combat inclined both get to have fun since everyone is contributing to the plan at once. Combat becomes less of the I hit you then you hit me, and instead into some of the best heist planning and bullshittery. The stuff that turns a fight into a story, gives everyone at the table a role to play rather than wishing to be anywhere else. So let's get on with it. When words are no longer enough, when negotiations break down and aggression by escalated means ensue, combat begins. Now, you could always run away, cower in fear, and keep your head low to avoid strays, but if you're a cornered rat, you ought to bite back first. Let's go over how to beat up said rats. Combat in a certain fixer's urban nightmare is split into several phases and steps. Admittedly, this will start sounding more like a board or card game rather than a TTRPG, but that's the price we pay for a more engaging game for everyone involved. Anyhow, combat maps are split into square tiles. Each is assumed to be about 2 meters in length. Starting out every combat and turn is the standby phase. After preparing the field of battle alongside the enemies involved in the encounter, the dealer will declare the start of combat. Here, the dealer will draw a number of cards from the deck equal to participating players and spread them face up to form a river of cards. Functionally, this is the whole party's hand of cards they can utilize for direct empowerment and several other special actions in combat. In subsequent iterations of this phase, the dealer will only draw cards to replace those used, up to the party's members. So if 2 cards remain in the river while the party has 6 players total, the dealer will draw 4 cards to replace those that have been expended. Aside from that, some status effects resolve their effects here, usually those that are supposed to have long-running effects through the entirety of a turn. Next comes the pressure phase. This is one of the bigger phases for actions and abilities. Here, entities maneuver around in an attempt to secure cover and better positions. Most active skills need to be used now in order to make use of their effects, and several actions unique to this phase can be utilized to gain tactical and strategic advantages. Anyhow, starting out, we need to introduce the concept of flow. Essentially, this is who performs this phase out of the player side and enemy side first. Whoever starts combat starts with the flow, meaning they process their pressure phase first, moving around, using actions and activating skills. This lets them catch people in engagement range and otherwise apply more pressure upon the enemy. The following turn, the flow swaps, and the new holder of the flow will do this phase first. For a brief overview of what's possible during this phase, the side with the flow gets to adjust their initiative, shift a number of tiles equal to their speed stats, pair up or unpair, decipher, and use skills up to their skill usage cap. This is then performed by the side without flow afterwards, before the phase then ends. What do each of those things actually do? Initiative. In a certain fixer's urban nightmare, initiative isn't a fixed stat for the entirety of combat, but rather an adjustable range based on your stats. Your minimum initiative is set by your finesse stat, whereas your maximum initiative is your finesse added to your speed stat. All participants in combat start at their minimum initiative, and have the option to raise or lower it during the pressure phase. To raise it, you must sacrifice an equal amount of defense to initiative gained. The amount sacrificed can only be done up to the maximum initiative of that entity. You may also not go below 0 defense while raising initiative. Regardless, this stat determines how early you act in the later phases, with the higher initiative allowing you to act faster. Anyhow, here is where our first form of card interaction can take place. If you so wish, you can take a card from the river to empower your initiative. This increases your initiative range by its face value in both directions. This means you can increase your initiative even further beyond your maximum, so long as you're willing to sacrifice a card and the extra defense stat to go above and beyond. Likewise, you can now lower your initiative below the minimum, gaining defense equal to the initiative lost. After using a card to empower your initiative, that card is then moved to the discard pile. If that card used was a trump card, that will instead get incinerated unless it is your personal trump. Beyond initiative is shifting. This is the catch-all term for moving in this system. By default, all entities are able to shift once during the pressure phase. Whenever you are offered the ability to shift, you can move a number of tiles up to your speed stats. There's a few caveats to be aware of in this system. First off, you cannot move through other enemies or players unless stated otherwise. Else you can move any of the 8 directions at the cost of 1 speed from your currently occupied tile. To note, shifting isn't finalized until the end of the phase, meaning you can mix any of the other actions in the pressure phase in between, including pairing up, skill activations, and deciphering as needed. Each point of speed also allows an entity to move 1 space upwards or downwards in verticality, provided you have the means to travel in those directions, those being a ladder, some kind of levitation, or other means of securing them in place. An entity can freely enter another's engagement range while shifting. By default, this is a bubble drawn around an entity equal to its melee range. This is 1 for unarmed entities, 2 for those with weapons, 3 if those weapons happen to be polearms with reach. On the other hand, leaving engagement range is a lot harder. If you leave engagement range, you may provoke an attack of opportunity. Entities can sacrifice one of their chain stats for that turn to perform an unopposed attack against an entity leaving their engagement range, unless that entity sacrifices a chain to leave safely. Only 1 chain needs to be sacrificed to leave all engagement ranges for that turn, unless you manage to enter a completely separate engagement range, in which case you'll need to burn more chain to escape that one too. An additional use for your chain stat in this phase is to shift an additional time. You can expend a chain to regain all of your speed, and thus move again after exhausting your free shift. Next is the ability to pair up. When facing off against something on your own isn't enough, you can opt to pair up with an allied entity to enjoy a boost in stats and combined capabilities. Upon mutual agreement to pair up between 2 adjacent entities, select 1 entity to be the primary and 1 entity to be the secondary. The primary receives half of the secondary's chain, combat skill, posture, defense, and limit, rounded up. While paired up, only the primary may use links during the melee and ranged phases. Passive skills are only active for the primary, with the secondary's ones being rendered ineffective. Both primary and secondary may opt to use active skills, however. In addition, while paired up, they will take up the space of the largest out of the 2, effectively being merged into a single entity on the combat map. During the pressure phase, you may only pair up or separate once. Upon initial pairing up, the primary's remaining movement is unaffected, meaning they can still move after becoming a single entity. Upon separating, the secondary is placed in a tile adjacent to the primary. If there are no tiles to separate, you cannot separate from one another. When forced separations occur under these circumstances, however, 1 entity will be downed instead, and all remaining movement will be forfeited. When paired up, you may choose to swap between primary and secondary once during the pressure phase. Furthermore, when damage is taken, only the primary suffers damage unless it is an area of effect attack or otherwise a multi-target attack. Keep that in mind, as only the primary can slot links during the melee and ranged phases to protect themselves. Deciphering. Sometimes a foe is difficult to read at first glance and requires some additional observation in order to figure out how to counteract them appropriately. Players can expend a chain in order to decipher an opponent and reveal their hidden skills or links. In doing so, they must make an intuition check. The difficulty is determined by the enemy's intuition and their remaining wounds combined. Every hit reveals a skill and/or hidden link. Skill usage. During the pressure phase, class and active skills can be utilized in order to gain the upper hand over your opponents. Each unique skill can only be used once unless stated otherwise. Additionally, not every skill can be used at this timing and must be used in other phases or steps. Skills with these unique timings will have it denoted in its skill description or profile, and require you to have a skill usage for its activation timing. Once both sides have concluded their actions during the pressure phase, we can move along to the declaration phase. This one is most similar to Ruina and Limbus in execution. With all of the zoning, push and pull out of the way, it's time to declare attacks and sort out targeting. This starts with the opposition declaring all of their intentions. These intentions are made up of links they plan to use and the targets of said links. These are then neatly spaced out on a timeline for players to see and react to. In doing so, players can target their own links in return against the opposition up to their chain stats. With one chain, you may slot in one link, whereas with two, you slot in two, and so on and so forth. Chain stat consumed during the pressure phase subtracts from chains usable here. To declare a link, the target must be in range. This is 1 tile adjacent if unarmed, up to 2 tiles away if armed, and 3 tiles away with reach. Ranged weapons can target a far longer distance dependent on the details of the grid piece. Individual links can then be targeted to different enemies, allowing an entity to take on multiple foes at once with the right setup. If 2 entities target one another with links, they are declared as clashing and their links will be resolved and performed under clashing rules. Entities can also be intercepted and forced to clash with one another if the player's initiative is equal to or higher than their opponent's. If there is no clash or interception, links will be performed unopposed and will process their effects with impunity. Past just targeting, all links used by players can be empowered from the river's cards. Each card can be used to empower one link in a party's declarations, garnering a few benefits in doing so. All cards used to empower offer their face value in limits to the link being performed. This allows for a sharper offense or a more stalwart defense if a player's stats are capped by their limit stat. Swords. These offer melee offense bonuses and empower melee links. These grant an additional free combat skill if the link counters in a clash or goes unopposed. Wand. These offer ranged offense bonuses and further empower ranged links, granting extra damage to ranged weapons equal to combat skill. The face value is the limits of combat skill to damage conversion. Cups. These offer evasive bonuses and further empower evade links. They grant the ability to reuse the evade link against all other unopposed links that target the user. Pentacles. These offer defensive bonuses and further empower guard links. These allow guards to ignore the initiative order and intercept any link in the chain. The guard empowered this way can also reduce received damage down to 0 instead of 1. Trumps. These offer the empowerment bonuses of the matching type to anything it is empowering. Melee links receive sword bonuses, ranged links receive wand bonuses, evades receive cup bonuses, and pentacles receive guard bonuses. For all intents and purposes though, a trumps card has a face value of 11. Matching trumps. These are a degree stronger than the aforementioned bonuses for regular trump cards that don't match your personal trump. Starting out, they have a face or card power of 21 instead of 11. When used for sword empowerments, they double combat skill instead of adding +3. For wands, they allow the full extent of your combat skill to be added, regardless of face or card power. Evades allow the user to counterattack with a single unopposed link after evading all links targeted at them. As for guards, it sends a spike of damage back equal to the amount of damage nullified. If cards from the river aren't used to empower a link, then before their usage, the dealer will draw a card from the top of the deck to act as its empowerment. This can lead to wilder and more unpredictable results, so ideally you want to use the river for more consistent empowerments, or otherwise manipulate your deck to your party's plans. Once all intentions, empowerments, and clashing has been sorted out onto a timeline, the melee and range steps will then play out. The melee step. Starting from the highest initiative, the dealer works downwards to resolve clashes and links until all of them have been processed. When 2 melee links clash against one another, the one with the higher combat skill wins the clash and deals damage to the loser. However, raw combat skill alone isn't always enough to determine a victor, and there are plenty of ways to buff it or otherwise counteract difficult clashes with a few technical touches and finishes. The first one is available to everyone, the combat triangle. This is a rock, paper, scissors system wherein strikes are countered by parries, those of which are countered by feints, and bringing it full circle is strikes beating feints. This is illustrated by the following diagram. When you are on the favorable side of this clashing triangle, you gain an additional +2 to your combat skill. Being on the favorable side of this triangle also activates the benefits of swords cards empowerments, granting it +3 if appropriately empowered. This is a 5 combat skill boost for empowering with a sword and clashing with some intelligence. As for clashing into defensive skills, when a melee link hits a guard, it takes the posture damage that it would inflict on landing the hits and reduces it directly by the defense stat. A strike that would hit for 12 would be reduced by 6 from a guard with 6 defense. effectively halving the damage. On the other hand, an evade takes the combat skill and compares it against defense instead. If defense is equal or higher, it fully nullifies the attack and the evader takes no damage. If it exceeds the evade, however, the target instead takes full damage as if it was an unopposed attack. Please take note of this when trying to mitigate damage in order to survive. A well-placed evade could save you compared to trying to tank every hit that comes your way. The range step. Going from fastest in the initiative to slowest, each individual link is dealt with in order. An entity that is targeted by a ranged link may react to it under a few circumstances. First, they must not already be staggered. Second, they must either be in cover or be faster initiative than the shooter. If they clear both conditions, they can react with a defensive link. Here, an evade compares against enemy combat skill, whereas a guard compares against the weapon's damage. Keep this in mind as some foes are more accurate but lack stopping power, whereas others lack significant precision but deal high-powered hits. You can figure this out by deciphering enemies or otherwise feeling the hit with your body. Beyond there is the resolution phase. During this phase, all entities recover to full posture. The timeline is cleared, with cards used for empowerments being discarded or burned accordingly. All active skills expire unless otherwise stated, and some status effects expire here too. If combat isn't yet over, increase the turn count and return to the standby phase. Swap which side has the flow of combat. This repeats over and over again until all enemies are dead or otherwise incapacitated, else if they've lost the will to fight. Essentially, if there's a good enough reason for combat to end, it will. Upon combat end, any cards remaining in the river will be reshuffled back into the deck for future checks and combats as required. Beyond there, if the deck has been reshuffled during combat, add a point of exhaustion to every party member involved in combat. Add an additional point for every subsequent shuffle as well. As for some wrinkles and nuances in combats, all the previous more or less outlines the basics you need to know in order to fight in a certain fixer's urban nightmare. However, there's a few more complicated matters to wrap your head around. Those being sparks, damage calculations, status effects, cover, and mortality. Sparks. These are a push and fold mechanic baked into combat. Whenever you use an offensively tagged link, you generate a defensive spark. Opposite for defensive links, wherein using them generates an offensive spark instead. Sparks are generated during a turn when links are used and become usable the following turn, after which they expire. This means that sparks only last for the turn in which they are available and do not carry over or stack between turns. Sparks can be used to power up their relevant links with a flat bonus to the stat used by 1 for every spark empowering it. If 2 offensive sparks are used on a strike link, it gains a +2 combat skill flat modifier. Likewise, if 2 defensive sparks are used on a guard, it gains +2 defense instead. Sparks can be used for a variety of other skills as well, where denoted. In addition, sparks can be used for party-wide benefits. 5 sparks can be consumed to draw a card from the deck to the river. 10 sparks can be used to steal away the flow on turns without. Costs for these can be shared. Damage. In this system, the amount of damage a link does is calculated in a variety of ways, mainly depending on how it was dealt. Posture damage. Generally speaking, this is base combat skill up to limit, plus flat modifiers, then multipliers last for an unopposed attack. Having 6 combat skill and a +2 bonus to it will deal 8 posture damage when hitting unopposed. On the other hand, with clashes, damage is usually reduced by the opponent's combat skill first, before having posture damage dealt. Wound damage. The posture damage taken exceeds an entity's remaining posture, they are staggered, and all other links they would perform are then cancelled. Wound damage is then dealt based on how much excess damage is dealt past 0. If the remaining posture damage exceeds 0, it always deals at least 1 wound. Going beyond that, if the damage exceeds their maximum posture, it deals an additional wound, and every time it exceeds the maximum posture again, another wound is dealt. Plus, if a target with 3 maximum posture takes 5 posture damage, they will be staggered and take a wound. If it was 6 damage, it would be 2 wounds of damage. 9 would be 3 wounds, etc. When a target is staggered, we would begin counting from 0 instead. For the example above, a staggered target would already take 2 wound damage from 5. 3 wound damage at 6, 4 wound damage at 9, and so on and so forth. Essentially, posture is a vital resource and should be carefully maintained in order to avoid taking more permanent damage. Status effects. These are a variety of conditions and ailments that can affect entities. Status effects work on an intensity system wherein their severity is dictated by the amount. Some status effects only activate once they pass certain thresholds of intensity, while some others will always be active, even from the first point. Regardless, unless mentioned otherwise, all status effects resolve their effects during the standby or resolution phase. We will go over these in a future video since there's quite a lot of them and Project Moon encourages having very unique ones. Cover. Parts of the environment or field that grant defensive bonuses to those who make use of it. Cover in this system is split between two categories. These categories are concealment and obstruction. Concealment refers to cover that only hides an entity but otherwise does not provide any tangible physical padding. This regards darkness, smoke, mists, and the like, conferring a bonus +2 defense to links with the evasion tag. In comparison, obstructions provide a physical barrier between entities and their targets. These are walls, sandbags, barrels, pillars, and anything else that would contribute to a defensive obstruction. All of these render a +2 defense bonus to both evades and guards. When either of those defensive actions are taken while making use of an obstruction for cover, posture damage is dealt to the cover first before applying to the entity behind it. Each material has a different amount of posture damage it will mitigate before the rest of the damage spills over. A wooden fence will be less effective at soaking damage than a steel door, after all. During the range step, cover also allows an entity to respond with a defensive link, regardless of their initiative. Dealers are encouraged to target entities in concealment less than those in obstructions, and target those in obstructions less than those in the open. Mortality. When a player loses their last wound in an encounter, they receive the fight or flight status effect. Instincts have activated and you'll either kick the bucket or bite back. Your base chain stat doubles for the entire duration. Fight or flight intensity is equal to your rank added to your willpower and reduces by 1 every time you get hit by a link, use a link, expend a chain, and at resolution phase. Upon reaching 0 intensity by any of the above conditions, you die. During the standby phase, you can perform a second wind check. This is a combined physicality and willpower check. On success, all fight or flight is purged and 1 wound is restored. On failure, your remaining intensity is halved. The check's difficulty is equal to 10 with hits required matching the remaining intensity. You may only exit fight or flight successfully once per encounter. As detailed above, fight or flight gives you double base chain which can be used to run away or disengage, else otherwise fight back and overwhelm your foe. However, if the final point of fight or flight intensity isn't reduced by a second wind check or some other form of medical stabilization, the player will die. While fight or flight is usually exclusive to players, more difficult enemies may have access to it as well, but beware the possibility of having a fight escalates right before death. Regardless though, fight or flight can only be salvaged once per encounter. The second time an entity enters it, it can be considered its death throes, and more or less acts as a counter towards imminent demise. Finally, with all of that out of the way, I suppose I ought to provide an example of how all of this comes together. For the sake of today's, this is our field, and these are our fixers, Claire and Suki. There's a set of 3 rats attempting to ambush them for a little extra cash if they can get away with their lives. Combat starts and the standby phase ensues. As there are only 2 player characters, 2 cards get drawn to the river by the dealer. As the rats are the ones instigating, they currently hold the flow and Fuss perform their pressure phase first. The rats attempt to surround the 2 newbie fixers and Fuss gain a solid enough position over them, having shifted accordingly. Upon the fixers' pressure phase, they've got quite a few options to deal with their situation. First, Suki burns one of her chain to leave engagement range safely, making some distance away from the ambushing rats. As a measly grade 9 fixer, she can't do much more to support outside of using some skills. In this case, she's a member of the 7 Association and Fuss has action to the deduction skill, always knowing the top card and having the ability to functionally brainstorm. Since having more cards won't help her here, this ends her pressure phase for now. At the same time, Claire opts to use a card from the river to empower her initiative. Not to go higher, but instead go lower, increasing her defense by initiative lost, in this case granting her 2 more defense. Being a little more greedier than her compatriots, she opts to use the deduction skill for herself instead, as she is also a member of the 7. She draws 4 cards, keeps 2 for the river, and returns the other 2 to the bottom of the deck shuffled. Since she cannot move outside of engagement range without risking getting hit by 3 other rats, she decides to hold her ground for now. With the pressure phase over, the declaration phase begins. Here, all 3 rats take the most straightforward approach. They all target strikes at Claire. As Suki has no chain to make use of here, he cannot slot in any links for the declaration phase. On the other hand, Claire needs to figure out a way to deal with the free attacks flying at her. To this end, she opts to slot an evade link against the fastest enemy rats. Furthermore, she empowers this with the Cups card in hand to be able to reuse this evade against all links coming her way, at least until she gets hit. As all declarations have been made, the melee step occurs. As Claire is down the bottom, the rats get to strike first, going from the top of the initiative downwards. With a whopping 9 defense, the rats are completely unable to touch her, and with the reused evade, she is able to avoid all free strikes accordingly. Through this set of evades, she generates 3 offensive sparks for the following turn. The resolution phase plays out with nothing further required before we reach the next turn's standby phase. As there are already 2 cards in the river, no more are needed to be drawn. The flow swaps over to the fixer's side, meaning they perform their pressure phase first. Suki uses this opportunity to gain more distance through shifting. Not being satisfied with the cards in the river, he activates Gifts from the Boundary and grabs her personal trump card, that being Judgment. The deck is shuffled afterwards, and a card is burnt from the deck facing down, according to the skill's description. Aside from that, she uses a card in hand to increase her initiative as far as it goes, reducing her defense to 0 for added initiative. Claire, on the other hand, is reverted to her normal initiative and defense as she opts to not empower it for a second turn in a row, instead saving the cards for the inevitable ensuing links coming her way. The declaration phase follows, and Claire is once again targeted by 3 strike links. Instead of opting to evade them all, she uses the sword card in hand to empower a parry, giving her a +5 to combat skill when used against a strike. Furthermore, she gives it +3 final power by using all of her built-up offensive sparks on it. She opts to clash into the fastest rat. Meanwhile, Suki pulls out a bow and arrow. Though it's tad expensive to be using on mere rats, if it'll save her friend's life, she may as well, right? Suki slots in a shoot link against the slowest rat, using her personal trump card to empower it, that being Judgment. With all the declarations sorted, processing ensues, starting with the melee step. Claire's 15 combat skill parry clashes against the rat's strike. It overwhelms the rat by quite a bit and instantly pastes them. As a lower end enemy, there's no fight or flight, so to speak. Neither is there much in the way of defenses or wounds. In this case, the rat was striking with 4 combat skill, meaning 11 damage had spilled over, eating into their posture. With a posture of 3, the rat stood no chance. 4 damage would have killed them, and 11 damage would have dealt 4 wounds. Although this is quite the extreme case, this is how scary melee can potentially be under the right conditions. After using the link, she generates a defensive spark for the following turn. That said, Claire doesn't have anything left to deal with the other 2 rats in terms of links or chain, so they get to unoppose her with impunity. With only 5 posture, she tanks the first hits, going down to 1 posture. The second, unfortunately, is enough to stagger her and deal a wound of damage. At this point, the range step kicks in and Suki looses her arrow. By default, this would be 10 posture damage, but as it is empowered with a personal trump card, it adds the full extent of her combat skill onto the damage. Since the rat is too low on the initiative and doesn't have any cover, the rat is impaled brutally by 17 posture damage from the arrow loosed. This would have resulted in around 5 wounds thereabouts. Your average backstreet rat is not at the level to tank that at all. Anyhow, the resolution phase occurs and Claire is restored to her maximum posture. She also recovers from stagger. The top of turn 3 comes around and the flow swaps back to the rats. 1 card is drawn to replace the sword card used by Claire, and another card is drawn in addition thanks to both being used. One of them is her own personal trump card, the High Priestess. We can all see where this is going, right? The rat accepts their fate and doesn't attempt to move during the pressure phase. For the fixers, Suki instead opts to use a chain to shift twice and pair up with Claire, boosting their stats dramatically. This is not going to be pretty. Declarations come around and the rat makes one more feeble strike attempt against Claire and Suki while they are paired up. First off, Suki increases Claire's combat skill by 2 for pairing up, granting half of her combat skill to her. Utilizing her personal trump card with a parry, he gets double the amount of combat skill for a total of 22. A base of 7, plus 2 from the pair up, plus 2 from the melee triangle counter, and finally multiplied by 2 for the personal trump. The rat negates 4 of that damage with their combat skill before getting slammed with 18 posture damage. This results in 6 wound damage, severely overkilling the rats and dyeing the streets red. While combat is unlikely to go quite this smooth all the time, this is a brief example of the possibilities even at the lower end, at least when played close to perfectly. I suppose that more or less gives the flow of most mechanics here anyhow. Next week we'll be talking on character progression, how you get stronger and how you get access to new stuff. Thanks for listening in once again to another Developer Diary. I hope this gave you a good insight into how this system incentivizes teamwork and careful deck manipulation to achieve advantages in combat. With the example above, there were many ways of taking 0 damage too, but for the sake of tutorialization, I had Claire receive some. Nonetheless, if you're interested in a certain fixer's urban nightmare, join up on my Discord below. There's currently a raffle in the event's announcement channel for one-shot participants at the end of the month. Once the system finally comes out, it'll likely turn into a weekly open session for viewers. Regardless, if you enjoyed the content, like the video and subscribe for more updates and lore videos in the future. I'll be streaming tomorrow for a Real Shoes kit reveal. Aside from that, if you'd like to support further, you can donate to the Ko-Fi or join up on my Patreon like Artie and Derp over here. Currently, it is just a way to show support, but I'll be fleshing out the perks more over the coming weeks. Thanks once again for tuning in. Appreciate it.